You were there, you were breathing, your heart was beating, your eyes opened and registered light for the first time. You felt temperature, the shock of cold air. You heard sounds, unfiltered, loud, overwhelming. Every sensory system you have was active and receiving input. Your brain was processing it. Something was happening. And you remember none of it, not just birth, the first 2, maybe 3 years of your life, gone, completely, not hazy, not fragmentary, absent. And the question most people never quite ask is the strange one. If something was experiencing all of that, and something was, where did those experiences go? What does it mean to have lived years of your life that the you sitting here cannot reach? I'm Paul Dirac. This question looks biological on the surface, but follow it carefully and it opens into something deeper, about what memory actually is, what a self actually is, and whether your experienced life and your remembered life are the same thing at all. They're not, and the gap between them is larger than you've probably considered. Start with what memory actually is, because the common model is wrong, and the wrong model makes the question harder than it needs to be. Most people think of memory as recording. Something happens, it gets stored, and later you retrieve it, like pulling a file. If that were right, infant amnesia would just be a retrieval failure. The memories are there, you just can't access them. Hypnosis, perhaps, or the right trigger might unlock them. This is not how memory works, and this belief, persistent as it is not supported by the evidence. Memory is reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it. It assembles fragments, sensory details, emotional tone, narrative context, associated information, and constructs an experience of remembering. The reconstruction feels seamless, feels like retrieval, but it's active synthesis each time. There is no stored recording. There is a pattern of synaptic connections distributed across multiple brain regions that can be partially reactivated to generate a reconstruction. Change the connections and you change the memory. This is why memory is fallible, confabulatory, suggestible, why eyewitness testimony is unreliable, why you can be convinced you remember things that didn't happen. For a memory to exist at all, 3 things must happen. Encoding, the experience must create a neural trace. Consolidation, that trace must be stabilized into long-term synaptic change. And retrieval, the pattern must be reactivatable. Infant amnesia is not primarily a retrieval problem. The encoding and consolidation systems weren't fully operational. The architecture for autobiographical memory wasn't built yet. The experiences didn't get filed, not because the filing cabinet was locked, but because the filing cabinet didn't exist. Here's the specific hardware problem. The hippocampus is the brain structure most critical for converting experience into long-term episodic memory, the kind that says, I was there, this happened to me, I remember it. In adult brains, the hippocampus encodes new episodic memories and gradually transfers them to the cortex for long-term storage. Without a functioning hippocampus, you cannot form new autobiographical memories, a fact established by cases like the famous patient H.M., whose hippocampus was surgically removed and who could no longer form any new long-term memories for the rest of his life. In human infants, the hippocampus is structurally immature at birth and continues developing through the first years of life. More specifically, and here's the mechanism that matters, the infant hippocampus is undergoing extremely high rates of neurogenesis. New neurons are being generated at a rapid pace, integrating into existing circuits. And this integration process, this ongoing cellular construction, actively disrupts previously formed synaptic patterns. New neurons fire randomly as they establish connections. This random activity overwrites or destabilizes earlier encodings before they can be properly consolidated. The process of building the memory system destroys the memories formed during building. The construction work disrupts the archive. You couldn't form stable, long-term memories, not because nothing was happening, but because the region responsible for stabilizing those memories was still under rapid development. And that development was, by its nature, disruptive to the encodings it was supposed to protect. This is why childhood amnesia fades gradually rather than ending abruptly. Neurogenesis in the hippocampus continues through early childhood at decreasing rates, which is why memories from ages 3 to 5 are fragmentary and often lost, while memories from age 6 or 7 tend to be more stable. The construction winds down, the disruption decreases, memory consolidation becomes possible. But there's another layer, one that goes beyond the neural hardware. Autobiographical memory, the narrative memory of your personal past, the memories that constitute your life story, depends heavily on language. Not because all memory requires language. Procedural memory, emotional conditioning, perceptual learning, these don't require language. But autobiographical memory, the kind that places you in a specific time and place and says, "This happened to me," relies on language to organize, rehearse, and retrieve experiences in a form you can later access. When a child starts talking, around 18 months to 2 years, something changes in how experiences are encoded. The child begins to narrate. "I did this. We went there. That was scary." This verbal rehearsal encodes experiences in a retrievable format, creates a temporal structure for memory, before, after, yesterday, tomorrow, and provides hooks for later retrieval. Parents participate. "Remember when we went to the park? What did you see?" This social scaffolding of memory reinforces encoding and consolidation. Before language, experiences are encoded in a different format: sensory, emotional, procedural. The sensations are real, the emotional responses are real, but they're not organized into the kind of temporally structured, narrative, self-referential format that allows retrieval as autobiographical memory. It's not that pre-linguistic experiences don't happen. It's that they're stored in a format incompatible with the retrieval system that you, as an adult, use to access your past. Language didn't just help you communicate, it gave memory the architecture it needed to become your personal history. But even language and a functional hippocampus aren't quite enough. There's one more thing required that makes this question genuinely philosophical. Autobiographical memory requires a self, a continuous, stable identity, an I for experiences to be attributed to. When you remember something, you don't just remember an event, you remember an event that happened to you. That, to you, requires a persistent self-concept, the understanding that the person who had the experience yesterday and the person recalling it today are the same entity. This self-concept develops gradually. Developmental psychologists have traced it through measures like the mirror test, the ability to recognize oneself in a mirror, indicating a concept of self as a distinct, continuous entity. Most human children pass the mirror test reliably around 18 to 24 months. Before that, the evidence suggests a less stable, less continuous self-concept, not no awareness at all, but something less unified, less persistent, less able to serve as the stable addressee for autobiographical memories. Think about what this means. For a memory to be filed as my memory, there needs to be a my to file it under. Infant amnesia is partly about the absence of that label. The experiences happened, but the filing system, organized around a stable, continuous self, wasn't yet robust enough to attach them to. There was experience, there may not yet have been a stable experiencer. Here's where it gets complicated in an important way. Infants are not memory blank. They have robust implicit memory, procedural learning, classical conditioning, emotional associations from very early, from before birth in some cases. A newborn recognizes its mother's voice. This has been demonstrated repeatedly. Newborns preferentially orient toward voices they heard during gestation, showing that acoustic learning occurred in the womb. Infants show preferences for melodies and stories their mothers read aloud while pregnant. The auditory cortex was encoding patterns before birth, not episodic memory, but learning, implicit, procedural, unconscious learning. And early emotional experiences leave traces that persist into adulthood in ways that are measurable and consequential. Infants who experience secure attachment with caregivers show different stress response patterns, lower cortisol reactivity, better emotional regulation than those who experience neglect or inconsistent care. These differences persist into adulthood. Early trauma leaves signatures in the HPA axis, the brain's stress regulation system. Epigenetic modifications, changes in gene expression, not gene sequence, caused by early life stress have been documented, passing through childhood into adult biology. You don't remember your infancy, but your body does. Your nervous system does. The emotional defaults you operate from, the attachment patterns you bring to relationships, the implicit trust or fear responses that fire before conscious thought, many of these were written before you had a self to remember the writing. You are shaped by a period you cannot access, formed by experiences you can't recall. This is not metaphor, it's measurable neurobiology. The boundary of infant amnesia is not, by the way, a clean wall, it's a gradient. Most adults have no episodic memories before age 2 to 3. Fragments appear between 3 and 5. More stable memories from 5 onward. But there's something interesting. Children between ages 3 and 5 often report memories that they later lose. At age 4, a child may clearly remember an event from age 3. By age 10, that memory is gone. This means some early memories form and consolidate temporarily. They exist, they're accessible, they're real, and then are subsequently disrupted and lost as hippocampal neurogenesis continues. The transition from amnesia to memory isn't a moment. It's a gradual increase in the probability that a given experience survives long enough and gets rehearsed enough to stabilize into a lasting trace. The earliest memories that make it into adulthood are the ones that were encoded robustly, rehearsed frequently, often through conversation with parents, and experienced with enough emotional weight to strengthen consolidation. Most early experiences don't survive, not because they weren't real, but because the system wasn't yet stable enough to keep them. Now, here's where the mechanism connects to something deeper, something that the science explains but doesn't quite contain. There was experience before there was memory of experience. That's not in dispute. The sensory systems were active, the brain was processing input, there was, in some functional sense, something happening, something it was like to be an infant encountering the world. And none of it left a trace in the system you use to access your personal past. This means your lived life and your remembered life are not the same thing. Your remembered life, the life you can access, narrate, identify as yours, started years after your lived life began. You have a history that predates your autobiography. There were years of experience, of emotional learning, of attachment and fear and comfort and sensation, none of which you can recall, all of which shaped you. We tend, without thinking about it, to equate our remembered life with our real life. The self we identify with starts at the earliest memory. Before that, nothing, blank, not yet me. But infant amnesia reveals that the blank is not the absence of a person, it's the absence of a recorder. The person was there, the experiences were real, the shaping was occurring, the recorder just hadn't been installed. And if experience can happen without leaving autobiographical memory, fully, completely, without a trace in the accessible record, then the question opens into something unsettling. How much of what your brain processes right now, how much of what you experience in some functional sense, never makes it into the autobiographical record? How much of your life happens below the threshold of what becomes your life story? The gap between living and remembering, proven so starkly by infant amnesia, might extend further than just the early years. Here's where I want to leave you. You think of yourself as starting at your earliest memory. That's the intuitive beginning, the first scene in the film of your life. But that first scene came years after the story began. There was a version of you, breathing, sensing, learning, being shaped, before there was a you who could remember being that version. You are the continuation of someone you cannot reach. The attachment patterns that feel like your natural way of being in the world were formed by that earlier self. The emotional templates, the implicit responses, the visceral comfort or discomfort that precedes thought, all of it was written before the writer existed in the form you now occupy. You were formed before you began. In the only sense that matters to the person you are now, the sense of a continuous, remembering, narrating self, you began years after you actually started. And the years before that beginning didn't disappear. They went somewhere else, into the body, into the nervous system, into the patterns that feel from the inside like just who you are. The gap between the life that was lived and the life that was recorded That's not a technical limitation waiting to be solved. That's a permanent structural feature of what it means to be a conscious creature that develops over time. You will never remember being born, not because the memory is inaccessible, but because the you that would do the remembering wasn't there yet, and something was. That's the part I find impossible to set aside.